The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. This is Julia Talbot, and I'm going to thank you for joining us at today's webinar for the Rapid Rehousing for Survivors of Gender-Based Violence and Human Trafficking Program Coordinator, RFQ. This RFQ was released on March 31st, and it will be due 12 o'clock noon, May 4th, 2022. Due to housekeeping, a little housekeeping, due to the volume of participants and just standard DFSS protocol, we keep everybody on mute. If you have questions, please ask your questions via the question box, and we'll respond to them. Probably take a break halfway through the webinar, and we'll respond to them, and then after at the end too. If you're having any technological problems, please put that in your questions as well so that we can help resolve those issues. I am being joined today by the lovely and amazing Maura McCauley, who's the Deputy of Homeless and DB for Services for the DFSS, and Adrienne Camarda, who's the Manager of Domestic or Supervisor of our Domestic Violence Programming. And they will be going through the background of the scope and program and selection criteria, all that fun stuff, and then we might take a little break for questions, and then I will go and talk about the technical aspects of making an application in the amazing E-Procurement system, and then we'll take questions again. Maura, would you like to take it away?
Great. Thanks, Julia. So the Rapid Rehousing Coordinator Program for Survivors of Gender-Based Violence and Human Trafficking is part of the broader Chicago Recovery Plan. In the 2022 budget, a significant amount of funding towards really critical initiatives was included. So from affordable housing to mental health, violence prevention, homelessness, workforce, and small business support, assistance to families, youth services, and many more initiatives. This gender-based violence received $25 million and is part of this larger plan. We encourage everyone to learn more about this and all of these other initiatives at the Chicago Recovery Plan website. The website is at www.chicago.gov/recovery plan. All of the opportunities for funding will be posted at this, on this one site. So in addition to the gender-based violence initiatives, you can find any other opportunities that are out there and just get other updates on recovery initiatives as they are rolling out. Next slide. So in 2021, Mayor Lightfoot announced the city's first strategic plan to address gender-based violence and human trafficking, which is really a whole of government approach. And it was developed with significant input from various stakeholders through listening sessions, an interagency working group that included roughly half of the city departments and sister agencies, community engagement through a brief community survey, conversations with two of the dedicated advisory councils to the mayor, and a special gender-based violence advisory council that was convened specifically to guide the development of this plan. That was made up of community organizations, survivors, and key city departments and sister agencies. Next slide. And so one of the really critical pieces of the plan is that through the recovery plan, $25 million has been invested into gender-based violence initiatives to really accelerate resources going into community to address the critical needs that everyone has identified and just continue to grow especially with the impact of the pandemic. So the categories that we are funding under this initiative is emergency financial assistance. That RFP also was just released last week. Today we'll be talking about rapid rehousing. Legal services is also an open RFP that was released 2 weeks ago. Coming up in the second quarter, we will be releasing RFPs for victim services for young people, and then prevention and education initiatives. So DFSS and the city have traditionally funded domestic violence services. And so this strategic plan and the funding that is attached with this is helping us to expand who we're serving and the range of services that we're able to provide. And we hope this is just the beginning of both of those efforts. Domestic violence, we know, is just one form of violence that is rooted in exploiting unequal power relationships between genders. Gender-based violence is an umbrella term for a range of interpersonal violence that includes, but is not limited to, sexual harassment, sexual assault, domestic violence, sexual exploitation, and human trafficking. We know that these different types of violence share similar dynamics of power and control, which increases the likelihood for victims to experience multiple victimizations. And so having services that can provide a wide, can address a wide range of needs is really critical. One of the results or impacts of survivor victimization is the lack of financial resources and housing instability when victims are fleeing or trying to maintain independence from persons causing harm. And we know that the pandemic has only exacerbated this hardship for survivors and their families because of increased isolation and increased limitations on financial resources, which is putting people at greater risk. Shelter options are minimal. And although there are other housing resources that have come to bear, we know that continuing to add to the crisis housing options is really important to help people move towards safety and stability and recovery. So the goals of this RFP are to prevent subsequent shelter stays and future housing stability for survivors. We are hoping to increase access to rapid rehousing options for gender-based violence survivors. Through this RFP, we will be providing assistance to survivors that will include short to medium-term financial assistance, housing location and stabilization services, ongoing survivor case management and advocacy services, and long-term planning to help survivors maintain their housing once those during the program and once the services transition. I'm going to turn it over to Adriana to go through the scope and more details in the RFP.
Thank you, Maura. My name is Adriana Camarda. I'm the supervisor on the Domestic Violence Division here at DFSS, and I'm going to go over the scope of work and application requirements for this RFP. Really, the purpose of this RFP is to increase gender-based violence survivor housing stability by offering these rapid rehousing and ongoing supportive services. We're seeking applicants that can really coordinate the rental assistance and supportive services for survivors who are fleeing for up to 24 months, and coordinate the comprehensive and supportive services for those survivors that have an emergency housing voucher for gender-based violence survivors from CHA. Here, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the focus population and the minimum eligibility criteria for survivors under this program. First off is like I said, the emergency housing voucher holder for gender-based survivors offered by the CHA. The applicant for this RFP will be coordinating the supportive services for those survivors who already have rental subsidy through the CHA. Then the other focus population is gender-based violence survivors, such as domestic violence, human trafficking, and sexual assault. for the rapid rehousing and services under this RFP. And we'll get a little bit further into the presentation about where these referrals will be made. And then underneath that eligibility, or underneath those GBV survivors, DFSS has priorities that we would like the rapid rehousing and services to be extended to. We would like them to focus on LGBTQIA+ survivors, as well as male identified survivors, undocumented households, non-native English speakers, survivors with disabilities, and again, immigrant or culturally specific services. And this will be conducted through community outreach and engagement services that the community-based and subcontractors will do to encourage gender-based survivors to engage and access these housing units. Now we'll get into a little bit about what we require for the program. First and foremost, we would like one administrator who will manage and administer the financial assistance portion of the rapid rehousing program, and also administer and direct the subcontractors who will be either providing the housing placement services or the supportive case management services to both the GBV survivors, the voucher holders, as well as in the rapid rehousing program. And through this, they'll be required to subcontract with service providers who and do some community outreach and engage survivors in communities that have greater barriers to access, greater retention in services, and who are disproportionately impacted by GBV. So here we'll begin to get into what activities will be provided under this RFP. Under this RFP, the first and foremost activity is the administration and coordination services. This portion of the award cannot be contracted. Therefore, the applicant will provide directly the administration of security deposits, rental payments, and fees with landlords. They will be responsible for forecasting financial assistance and rental payments through the end of the contract and monitor expenditures. They will also be subcontracting with gender-based and human trafficking service providers in order to provide the outreach, this housing placement services, and ongoing case management. They will coordinate the client referrals from not only the DVH2 coordinated entry system, but they will also be working with DFSS to develop an alternative pathway for those survivors that have limitations or are not engaging in access to these housing units. The administrator will also match survivors to the subcontracted service providers. They will provide move-in assistance to survivors, including furniture and household items as needed. They will also be reporting to DFSS all of the data collected in performance management and quality improvement processes. And they will be facilitating cross-training for the GBV survivor agencies that they subcontract with. And finally, they'll be responsible for collecting survivor feedback. The second activity is really the management of the housing portfolio itself. This portion is really in terms of the rapid rehousing program, may or may not be subcontracted by the administrator. And there are no limits on how many subcontracts that they can hold for the housing placement. The housing placement really centers around identifying and securing a broad portfolio of landlords and housing units for survivors to select from. That doesn't mean that survivors have to take any unit from this portfolio, but landlord engagement is also a requirement in these activities. Like I said, outreach to landlords and property management companies to expand and increase the options under that portfolio. This part of the administration will also be creating and implementing the process for housing inspection. They'll be establishing a landlord crisis management for survivors, knowing their tenant rights and landlords and intervention. And then finally, providing housing location application and placement services on behalf of the survivor. That is survivor-centered, victim-centered, and allows them to incorporate safety planning and choice in where they would choose to live. Then the final activity is the supportive services component, and this includes both the rapid rehousing project and the services for the EHV, voucher holders, and the CHA units. This portion must be subcontracted either in part or in total, meaning that the applicant could provide some of these services. However, we're mandating that the applicant also subcontract with other community agencies to provide the housing stability case management for survivors in the both portfolios. This includes ongoing case management, advocacy services or access to legal services, assistance with VAWA and other protections under the law, or other criminal reimbursement programs, workforce services to increase their income and to reduce the barriers to employment or increasing their income, financial stability, life skills that they may be needed as required, eviction and landlord mediation services, and transition for the voucher holders from services. Having said that, some of the performance goals under both portfolios can be outlined here. For the rapid rehousing portfolio, a performance measure is that 70% of the households enrolled in the rapid rehousing successfully maintain their lease after 24 months. 66% of those survivors in the rapid rehousing program will maintain or increase their income. And then there will be a victim survivor survey component in the rapid rehousing portfolio. For the emergency housing voucher holders, we set the performance goal at 90% of those voucher holders will maintain their voucher during the reported period, and 80% of the survivors will agree in the client feedback survey that they felt supported and empowered by the case management and the services that they received. Now we'll get into the scoring of the application that's submitted. There are 5 areas of selection criteria that are assigned a different amount of points. The first that we'll cover here is the community involvement selection criteria. It is worth 35 points. This area is really about the applicant's expertise and background in working with the focused population that we discussed. They need to have relevant capability and infrastructure to be able to provide these services, even as the administrator. Also, the respondent needs to demonstrate that it has a process for collecting and incorporating client feedback into its program model, and that the respondent demonstrates a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that their leadership reflects and engages the diverse people that it serves. In this component as well, just going back, will also be, like in the first bullet, this will also be where their partnerships and subcontracts with the community-based organizations that, that will be providing the supportive services is also where your applicant will reflect their diversity as well and their ability to really engage survivors that have been challenged in accessing housing needs. The second selection criteria is the strength of proposed program, and this is worth 40 points. In this criteria, the respondent has to describe how it will administer and coordinate financial and supportive services through subcontractors and subcontracts to achieve the outcomes and goals. How the respondent will, in this area, they will have to describe the specific services that itself directly and all of its subcontractors will employ to achieve the housing placement services. And in this area, they will also have to respond and provide, either directly or through its subcontractors, how they will address the needs of the subpopulations and the focus populations that we described, with victim-centered case management, advocacy services, access to legal services, landlord mitigation and outreach that support survivor rights, maintaining and increasing income so that they can sustain their housing stability after the program and find permanent housing. Here, the selection criteria continues for the 40 points. The respondent also has to propose in the program how it uses best practices to really engage its population and meet their performance goals. The respondent has to demonstrate a clear understanding of the focus population and what barriers they face. And finally, the respondent's subcontractors also have to propose how they're going to provide survivor-centered and trauma-informed care, culturally competent and non-discriminatory services in an effort to reduce the barriers and obstacles victims face in accessing services. And then the subcontractors will also be provided a detailed plan on how they will serve the voucher holders under this portfolio and provide, and not only that, and work with Dfss, as you mentioned, on coordinated entry and the alternative pathway to get to these housing units. The next selection criteria is performance management and outcomes. It's worth 10 points. The respondent must demonstrate strong past performance in a similar program. The respondent has to have relevant systems and processes to track and report the program outcomes and goals that we discussed. They also have to have experience using data to inform and improve its services, and also demonstrate in collecting this very sensitive and survivor data, how they collect, store, and protect the survivor confidentiality and the sensitive information of these survivors. The fourth out of the fifth selection criteria is organizational capacity, which is worth 10 points. Here in the application, the respondent has to demonstrate that it has staff and subcontractors responsible for all of the service components that have qualifications and certifications as required. They need to show that they have adequate systems and processes to support monitoring expenditures under this program, and that they can adequately hire and manage staff, the qualified staff in a timely manner. And finally, the fifth criteria is reasonable cost and budget justification, which is worth 5 points. The respondent has to demonstrate fiscal capacity to implement this proposed program and demonstrate that their costs are reasonable. And we'll get into a little bit more on the budget in the next slides. But before we do that, in the selection criteria, understand that your application also has required attachments. They are any reports or studies or other documentations that show your performance, especially for applicants that have not received DFSS funding. This is powerful to show past performance. Then the next thing is qualify or any staff that is placed on the budget or part of your work plan that you're proposing. We ask that you attach resumes, certifications, or licensures for any of the key staff that we oversee in the program, including subcontractors if you have that. And also there will be a budget attachment required to show your proposed budget for the program plan. As promised, here we go over a little thing about the budgets that you'll be proposing. The term of this particular contract is pretty aggressive. We have a contract term of May 15th, 2022, all the way through December 31st of 2024, which means you have 2 full years plus this year in an overall contract award. DFSS also has an option to extend for 1-year periods up to 2 years after 2024, based on the need and availability of funding and the performance. We anticipate funding only one administrator under this RFP to administer the 3 program activities that we discussed. However, there is no limit to the number of partners and subcontractors that the administrator may have. Total funding available under this RFP through 2024 is $4,229,000 for the entire program, but the administrative costs or indirects are capped at 10% or a federally approved rate. You do not have to submit your indirect federally approved rate, but your budget should reflect this cost in your proposal. Also, please submit a budget for only 1 year, 12 months of services, regardless of the fact that this contract period will run from May 15th to December 31st. We ask that you submit a budget period for 1 fiscal year. The cost category definitions that are attached in the budget instructions, and you should be cognizant of those when you're putting together your cost proposal to make sure that your cost that you're associating in each budget line is in the DFSS approved budget cost category. Also be thoughtful and inclusive when you're developing the budget and to apply for your program's actual costs. And then finally, you should also be using reasonable, you should also be providing narratives or explanations for your costs so that an evaluator can assess your proposed budget and the reasonableness of the things that you've determined will be reflected in the budget. Some of the common mistakes that we see applicants make when they're submitting their budgets is that they either grossly under or grossly over budget for supplies and materials. That is one of the frequent errors that we see. We often see that applicants do not fill out the job description titles in the budget submission, or the job description titles don't necessarily correlate or align with the job description of the staffs that are mentioned in the program narratives of the application. So please be careful about that. It also behooves you to put a brief job description in the budget proposal itself or attachment that aligns with your application so the evaluator can see your reasonable costs and how you're going to perform your proposed plan. And then obviously put your budget in the appropriate columns. Like I said, the cost category instructions are included in the budget attachment. This is a rough contract timeline or a proposed timeline that DFSS has put together. We released this RFP on March 31st. Obviously, the applications are due back May 4th at noon. We're hoping to award and contracts by May 15th. And we will begin accepting referrals for the CHA, gender-based violence EHV holders by July 1st, and accepting referrals or placing persons or survivors in rapid rehousing units no later than September of 2022. And then, as we spoke of, your contract period starts May 22nd and runs through December of 2024, but your budget period will always end on December 31st of the current year. So your budget period will run through this December of 2022, and you will be receiving another contract renewal award for January 1st, 2023 through December 31st of 2023, and so forth. Advances. There are eligible advances under this RFP for the applicants. I advise you to look at the section, contract section, and the RFP discusses what advances are eligible for. They must be considered in accordance with the city's advancement payment policy. You must, if you want to exercise the option for advanced costs, you must say so in the application itself. And under this RFP, the only advanced costs that are eligible are security deposits, fees, and rent towards landlords, which is a little bit different than our past RFPs. So make sure you review that section. Also, DFSS is attaching the delegate agency request for advanced mobilization payment form. The reason is so that you can see all of the city guidelines and policies associated with advanced payments, but the form itself is not required at the time of application. The only thing that is required at the time of application is a yes, no as to whether you as the applicant will be exercising this option. And then finally, I cannot stress enough, and Julia will get into a little bit further about what the deadline of noon on May 4th really means, but that is the deadline for this RFP. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Julia Talbot from DFSS, who's going to go over how to submit an application. Julia?
So much, Maura and Adriana, for your informative presentations. I'd like to just take a minute to see if anybody has any questions that they would like to put up in the question box, ask right now, before we kind of get into the nitty-gritty about how to make an application in the e-procurement system. Again, though, you can also, there'll be time at the end of the presentation to ask questions about any aspects of this RFP that you desire. Just to, while we might be formulating the questions, let's go through the transition timeline. So today is the pre-proposal webinar. The due date to submit questions will be tomorrow. Applications are due on May 14th, or rather May 4th, not May 14th. And the program period begins a very tight May 15th. And so it's a compressed evaluative timeline. I see we have a question here. If this isn't using the coordinated entry system, what is the preferred system to prioritize people for housing? Excellent question.
I just want to clarify. So this program will be using the coordinated entry system, but we also have heard just through the different types of community engagement with the work we're doing on the gender-based violence strategic plan that there may be circumstances where we need to create alternate pathways. So we are expecting this this program to still use the coordinated entry system, but we will be developing, when the applicant and the partners are selected, we will be convening a working group with those providers and other partners, from the different service communities to identify what an appropriate alternative pathway is. So yeah, there will be two options, but it will still use coordinated entry as a starting point.
Let's see if there's any other questions. So just to kind of get started, I have some application tips, and then we're going to go through screenshots on two very common things that you will need to do in e-procurement. If you have never done business with the City of Chicago, you'll need to register your organization into iSupplier. Your iSupplier account, which is controlled by you and your organization, is the kind of the key to entry and to get and access the e-procurement system, which is where we keep all of our contracting and finance procedures. So you'll need your iSupplier account to access e-procurement, which is where you'll make your applications for various RFPs and funding opportunities. You will submit vouchers. You'll converse about funding and contractual matters. Should you have a contract with us? And so that's, if you don't have an iSupplier account, you need to get one. That you'll do that by filling out sort of a brief form online, and I think the website is in some subsequent slides, the website link rather, and it will take a few days. So if you don't have one, please register as soon as possible so that you can get up and running and get into the application as soon as possible. My mantra for doing RFPs with the e-procurement system for Dfss is start early and save often. I also highly recommend that people review the RFP narrative documents and look at the application questions prior to really jumping into the application. And remember, our applications and our RFP narrative, as well as our evaluative tools, are all interconnected. They are built on sort of scaffolded on one another. So the narrative or scope section, from that, we draw out our application questions. From the application and the narrative, we sort of triangulate it to your selection criteria. And from the selection criteria comes the evaluation instrument. So you should use the information in the RFP for guidance in formulating your answers. If you have a question about the direction that you might take, or what you think, if there's a preferred approach, you should definitely be looking at the RFP narrative to see, the direction that the city would prefer for you to take, and make your judgments about what you're going to say from there. I always say to carefully review the selection criteria. Each question in the application is aligned with a selection criteria, and those things are what we use to evaluate your applications. So it's all interconnected. When you're making your application itself, there's a 4,000 character limit, which includes punctuation and spaces, and each response is allotted 4,000 characters. So that's 4,000 characters ends up being about 2/3 of a single spaced page. So that's the kind of the maximum about your answer, about the length of answer that you can have. You can obviously be shorter, you just can't be longer. E-procurement is not going to tell you when you exceed that 4,000 character limit. It's just going to cut you off. And so and additionally, when you submit your application, you don't have access to it any longer except in a PDF format. So I always tell people that it's best to kind of do the work of writing your application questions answers in a word processing document or software that allows you to do those character counts, so you can make sure that you're under the 4,000 character limit and that you will actually have your work for another opportunity. Don't use your back button on your browser in e-procurement, because it will basically pretend that it's still working, and then when you go to save or get out or whatever, it will give you an error message and it will not have saved. So it's tricky that way, so don't use the back button on your browser, navigate through the e-procurement system by clicking on. Generally, anything that's highlighted in blue allows you to navigate back to where you were or to the next thing you want to go to. And we'll see that in some of the screenshots. You can submit your application and later amend it up until the due date, which is May 4th at 2022 at 12 o'clock noon. We are not allowed to submit late applications. The only way we can submit application late, or we can accept a late application, is by reissuing and reopening the entire RFP for rebid. So this is this does not happen very frequently. And if in the case of we would have to, if we did that, we would have to, when we would repost, we would have to have everybody who had posted resubmit their stuff. So generally speaking, no late applications. We don't accept them. We actually can't accept them. We do not take files of your applications. The only way you can get into the system is to be considered is through e-procurement. And so make sure that you get your application in by 12 o'clock noon. I always encourage people to consider submitting the day before the application is due, just because if you need any technical assistance, that will give you the opportunity to make sure that you have enough time. The city at this point, because of this ARP funding, we have a record number of RFPs being put out there, both in Dfss, but also in health and in any number of other city departments. And that means that the e-procurement hotline or the helpline might have some waiting times to them. It might mean that I try to get back to people within 24 hours, but if you only give me 45 minutes, that's not, that might not be enough time for me to get back to you and resolve your issue. So I really highly encourage people to try to submit the day before. I also tell people you should budget on 30 to 40 minutes for the submission process. You'll see in subsequent slides when we go through how to submit that it is not just click send and buy. It's sort of more like click send and then 5 screens later, maybe, if you're having a technical problem, you can call the e-procurement hotline for help at 312-744-4357 or 744-HELP. You can also call me or email me. The helpline, I know that they try to get back to people within 24 or 48 hours. I'm almost always gives you I will get 24 hours is the latest that it will be unless I'm out of the office, in which case you'll get an email or a voicemail saying, telling you such. But e-procurement hotline has a higher level of access in terms of resolving a serious issue. Please note that the hotline operates during business hours only. However, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, I sometimes operate at different later hours. So if you're finding yourself stuck on a Saturday, call or email me first. You have there would be a higher likelihood that I would return your phone call during a weekend than the e-procurement hotline. So again, save often, submit early. Remember, use the system, the things that the system gives you to your advantage. If I had one person who was a new applicant, and they literally submitted their application every day because they also wanted to practice submitting, which I thought was pretty brilliant. In terms of more technical assistance, if you're looking for more RFPs to apply for, you can always go to the Dfss website and see under the alert section or the funding opportunity section and see what we have out. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on the Dfss YouTube channel. The link will be the link to the webinar and the PowerPoint will be posted on the Dfss webpage for the Rapid Rehousing RFP. Will be under that funding opportunities page. Additionally, we will be taking all of the questions that we received today, as well as from other sources during this time up until tomorrow, and putting them into an amendment. That amendment will be posted on the RFP's application site in E-Procurement. If you have other questions, you can always go to customer support. You can email customer support at cityofchicago.org. You can call them. If you're a person that really prefers to do, you like to look at PowerPoints and listen to things, videotapes, there's a lot of training materials and documents that you can go to on the City of Chicago iSupplier online training materials. The stuff that's going to be most relevant to your experience is under the delegate agency contracting section. So now, as I alluded to, we always post an amendment that has all the questions and answers and any other things that might be pertinent or need to be corrected in the RFP. And so because of that, you'll need to know how to accept an amendment. You can either accept an amendment, if you've already started your application, the accepting of the amendment will pull whatever you have done in e-procurement into the amended RFP document or RFP sort of site. And if you haven't, we'll accept the amendment as part of starting your application, which is called creating a quote in e-procurement suite. So here we are kind of at the beginning of that process. So it says, the RFP you're interested in has been amended. If you want to start your application, or if you've already started an application, you're going to need to acknowledge and accept the amendment first before you can go back to your work or you can start your application. So to accept the amendment to begin that process, you're going to go to the View Amendment Histories here, which is I've circled. It says View Amendment History. When you click on that bright blue View Amendment History button, it will take you to the amendment document itself, and it will start the process. If you want to, and then if you have not started an application and you need to, then you're going to also do this actions, go to the create quote and hit go. And then that's going to take you, either of these will basically, you'll end up at this screen where you're going to start the acceptance process. So on the left-hand side here under the document number, if you click on the document number, it's going to take you to the RFP. You're going to be able to access the amendment document. In this middle part here, there's an amendment description. And it's basically just a little one-liner that says, it has the questions from the webinar. Oh, we're changing the insurance amounts. Anything that we need to amend or change from the original RFP or correct, that will be in the amendment description, and you'll need to look at the specific amendment document to find the particulars of the content. To review the changes, you would click here on this little infinity or eyeglass document, and then once you have fully examined the documents and really gained at least some awareness, if not mastery, over what the amendment has to offer you, you're going to acknowledge the amendment by clicking on the Acknowledge Amendment buttons on the upper or lower right-hand side. When you do that, you're going to be thrown to this screen where you're going to accept the terms and conditions of the RFQ and acknowledge the changes made to the RFQ amendment via the amendment document. So you're going to click this very small box, and then you're going to hit the Acknowledge button on the right-hand side again. That will take you to this screen where you're going to confirm your acknowledgement of the amendment. And it says, you may now proceed. You've acknowledged successfully. You may now respond to the negotiation. Do you wish to proceed? I can't imagine anybody saying anything but yes, but they give you the option to say no should you have something else you would like to do. You want to go back and review it. So you'll hit yes, and then that will take you to a final screen where you accept the terms and conditions of the entire quote, of the amendment and I guess the RFP. So you're going to click another very small box saying that you've read and accepted the terms and conditions here. And then you're going to go again to the upper or lower right-hand side and click your accept button. And this is the final step in accepting the amendment. You now have gained amendment knowledge, and I would give you a certificate, except you still have to do the application. So the second thing I really want to go through here is how to submit the application. As I alluded to, it's not just a sort of hit send and see like we all secretly wish it was. But this, e-procurement does give you a lot of opportunity to review your work. And generally speaking, I have found in life that reviewing one's work is usually worth the time and effort. So when you're ready to submit, you're going to start by saving your draft one last time, and then you're going to hit continue. When you click the continue button, what e-procurement is going to sort of scan your entire RFP document, or your application rather, for kind of what I would consider to be sort of low-hanging fruit problems. It's not gonna look at content issues, but it is gonna tell you some basic stuff like you forgot this, that, or the other thing. And so when you hit continue, it's gonna do this scan, and then you're gonna get a number of error messages. I played around with the system. It's very easy to rack up, like what seems to be an alarming number of error messages. But when you read it through, they're fairly easy to resolve. So we're going to go through the two most common error messages that people get. The first is this one that says you must quote at least one line in the RFQ. The lines, as you'll see right here, there's a little tab right below that says lines. You're going to click on that tab. In Dfss, we require that you do a cost proposal or an Excel spreadsheet budget, and that is what we review and evaluate your proposal on. The lines, however, is something that has to be filled out for a later step. And so the system is going to ask you to put in numbers into the lines on that tab. You can put in the numbers from your budget, or you can put in your favorite number, or you can put in all ones. We don't look at these lines to evaluate at all. We go by what you put in your budget document. But to get rid of the error message, you must quote, you must answer on at least one line in the RFP. And so this is what we ask of you. The second really most common error message people get is this one that says a quote value is required for the requirement first name. And this is e-procurement speak. A quote value, as you can see down in the lower right here, a quote value is really e-procurement for answer. And it's required for the requirement. A requirement would be your application questions. And the requirements, each requirement has a name. In this case, the requirement's name is first name. And so a more human way of translating the sentence would be, you neglected to put your first name to answer the question, what is your first name? And so you would go in and you would answer. So those are the two most common things that error messages that people get. After you have resolved all of your error messages, when you hit continue, you're going to get this review and submit header. So at that point, you're really going to be able to scroll down and do one last review and check of your application, what you're going to submit. So it is, it's review and submit. So you're going to review, and you're just going to keep scrolling down, and you'll see everything that you submitted. And then you can see your attachments, you can check your work, you can see the answers to all your questions. And then at the very bottom of all of that scrolling, you're going to have, there's a place to have your electronic signature, which you're going to put in your name and then your title, and then you are going to click the box. If you put in your name, you click the box first, when you put your name and title in, it will give you an error message telling you that you did it in the wrong sequence. So name, title, click the box. And then I couldn't fit this all on one screen, but you then would sort of scroll to the right, and you'll see this submit button. You will hit the submit button, and you will have then submitted. I would love to be able to say like, oh, and then you'll turn into a unicorn. That seems like so much more fun. But in fact, it will just be that you have submitted your application successfully. You'll see this confirmation screen. The e-procurement system will send a confirmation email to the email that is associated with the RFP application that you just made. It will end up most likely in your spam or junk folder, so please check there. But you should get a confirmation email from the system. You should also, if you want more immediate confirmation, do feel free to call me or email me, and I would be more than happy to confirm. The second that you hit send or submit is the second that that your application I can see it, and I am more than happy to confirm with you that the application indeed has been received by us. Because hey, why not? So that really concludes what I have to say about e-procurement. We're now going to open the floor up for more questions. Here are, just in case you needed them, here's how to get a hold of Adriana. She's the person to contact for program questions. If you want to talk about e-procurement stuff, I am the person to talk to, or email. But I am excited that you guys are interested in this application, and let's just see if there's any questions.
Julia, this is Adriana. I don't see any additional questions, but there is a participant who has their hand raised. So I'm not sure if they could enter their question in the question box or.
Yes, I would love for if the participant who has their hand raised could answer their question could type their question into the question box. That would be lovely. Thank you, Adriana. So, Adriana or Maura, do you have any additional comments that you would like to share about either the Rapid Rehousing program or the application experience? I've given people all my tips and etc., but maybe you guys have other things you'd like to say, or maybe not.
No, I don't have anything to add. If you're having problems putting questions in the chat box, you can always email them to me and Julia after the webinar, where we're accepting questions to be included in the question and answer session or amendment. So you can always do that if you can't figure out how to use the question box.
Yeah, and the only thing I guess I would stress is that when Adriana was talking about making sure that you put put your requests in the right column, we recently, well, it's probably about a year ago now, had somebody apply, and they put all of their budget in the share column. So it looked like they were applying to do a program for us for free. So that was very difficult to untangle. So it's like, it's really the stuff of sort of the kinds of nightmares are made of those kinds of errors. So yes, please don't do that. Will we send out the presentation? We will post the presentation on the DFSS website along with the link to this webinar on the DFSS YouTube channel. So that is the answer to that question. Other than that, if there are no additional questions, I think that we will conclude the webinar for today. I thank you all so much for coming to the webinar and for your questions and attention. We are so looking forward to reading your applications for this opportunity to provide services to citizens of Chicago who really, need these services. And thank you so much for the work that you do already. Any additional comments, Adriana, Maura?
No, there is a question in the box. Will we send out the presentation?
Yes, I addressed that. We will not send out the
mistake.
presentation. It will be posted on the DFSS website.
Yes, sorry. Thank you.
No problem. So yes.
All
Well,
right.
if
Thank
that
you,
is
everybody.
all, we look forward to reading your applications on May 4th.